Today, like every other day that this government has been in office and has come to this honorable chamber, is a day when serious business is transacted. I have to confess that I am cognizant of that, but I'm also still coming to grips with the loss that St. Peter has suffered and that wider Barbados and the region. And I think I'm on good ground in saying the world has lost. And the passing of former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, has been a significant blow to all of us. It has impacted me because I have always considered that I have come to this place standing on his shoulders. And I said to him, I would not have had to step high, literally, to step onto his shoulders, but figuratively, Mr. Speaker, intellectually, a giant of a man, and I stand in many, many ways in his shadow. He had a number of sayings, and one of them, when he meant that you had to go and do what you were supposed to do, one of them started with, face it. And so, in tribute to him, to some degree, I am facing what I have to do in spite of what is going on in my mind and in my heart today. I'd like to express to the Honorable Chamber the thanks on behalf of the people of St. Peter for the opportunity that he was given and that we gave to him to participate in this chamber, in the business of the chamber, and ultimately to be part of the leadership of the chamber and of the country. And so we move forward cognizant of the road that he has traveled and cognizant of the path that he has left for us, me in particular, as his successor in representing the constituency, the path that he has, with his larger-than-life feet, left for us to traverse. And in many ways, Mr. Speaker, he was a groundbreaker. In many ways, he was a groundbreaker. He was a visionary, and I've found that he is in the tradition of Barbados Labour Party visionaries. So we go back to the late Right Excellent Sir Grantley Herbert, and we often speak of Tom Adams. We speak of Owen Arthur as a visionary where he wanted to take Barbados. And now we have the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast. In that tradition of vision, in that tradition of excellence, in that tradition of representing Barbados not as a backwater place somewhere behind somebody's back, but a country that is able to stand toe-to-toe with any other country in this world. And that is the basis. He was a cricketing man, so that is the wicket. I'm not a cricketing person, but at least I know some of the words. That is the wicket on which I will try my hand. That is the wicket he has left for me. It is the wicket he has left for us.
To bat or honorable member to bat or to bowl or to do both?
To bat. I can hold the bat. I'm not sure if the ball will connect to the bat, but at least I've learned from the honorable member for St. Michael Northeast, if I cover the stumps and I leave balls outside the off stump, then I should be good. I should be good. I should last a little while.
True.
So in following on my predecessor in St. Peter, and following the instruction of the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Member for St. Michael Northeast, I'm going to block the stumps and let any balls outside the off stump travel and go past. If the umpire wants to call wide, the umpire is so able to do. But as I speak, Mr. Speaker, yeah, that would be more appropriate. But Mr. Arthur, the former Honorable Prime Minister, was not into basketball. Mr. Speaker, the Barbados Labour Party was born out of an uprising by the people of this country against discrimination. 2 days ago, we celebrated the day of national significance, July 26. And on July 26 every year, we reflect on those days, that period of time in 1937, when the people said to the country, we have had enough of being discriminated against. We have had enough of being put at the back of the line, made to sit in the back of the church, made to struggle even to get an elementary education, being forced to struggle to earn a living so that they could survive. The people rose up 2 days ago, 1937, to say we have had enough of that. The Moyne Commission was established, it did its work, and it agreed that the people were being discriminated against. In St. Peter, particularly in Boscobel, there are these stories about the shaking of the canes so that rats would run out, so that people could catch them in bags. This is not in 37, this would have been a couple decades before. But the suffering of a people being deprived of the ability not just to earn, but having earned, if they could have, they would have been able to eat. The people of this country rose up against that kind of a society. And discrimination occurs. There are some who believe that they are better than others. We spoke to this quite extensively when we debated the resolution brought by the Honorable Member for Christchurch South on Black Lives Matter. But there are situations where people feel better than others. And because they feel they are better than others, then they have the right to treat other people as lesser, so that others do not have to or are not allowed to enjoy the same benefits that they enjoy, because they are superior, whether it is something as serious and as fundamental as the color of skin, whether it is something as fundamental as ethnicity, whether it is something as fundamental as a person's sex. But it also extends, and it has so extended for thousands of years. There have been many cases where women who either could not bear children or who chose not to bear children were seen as lesser than those who bore children. And Mr. Speaker, even in my lifetime, I've had what I think people consider to be jokes, but I've had situations where people have intimated to me that because I have 2 daughters, no sons, that I may be a little bit less than them. No, that is not fundamental, but it speaks to a mindset, a psychological construct where, because of some advantage I'm perceived to have, I am better than you because you do not exhibit the same thing. You do not possess the same thing. And so I am better than you, so I can treat you differently. I can treat you and I can stop you from being able to access, from being able to achieve, from being able to live. And that, Mr. Speaker, is not acceptable. And then there is also the case where some people discriminate against others because they do not hold the same view. They don't hold the same view. And disagreeing is one thing. But when that disagreement speaks to, when it gets to the point of right and wrong, which I don't have an issue with, because, Mr. Speaker, I did not come to politics to speak things that are politically correct. The Member of Parliament for St. Peter, the last one and the current one, believe that some things are right and some things are wrong. Now, that may be judgmental. But I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that that does not give me permission to discriminate against those who I believe are wrong. So if I felt it were wrong, and I'm going to use this example because I know that you are a man who understands mirth. If I felt it were wrong for a man to grow hair longer than 1 inch, it would not give me the right to discriminate against the current Speaker of this Honorable House of Assembly. It does not, because as far as I am concerned, we are equal. We are all human beings. But there are some cases where, because of differences of views, some people are perceived to be lesser. Some people are believed to be so far outside of what is considered correct that they are to be mistreated. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that a country cannot exist with that kind of a construction on its society. Discrimination in any form is, for me, an unacceptable scourge. It is a scourge. Anytime one human being treats another human being as lesser, that is a scourge on humanity. And as far as I am concerned, it must be rooted out. Discrimination in all of its forms is wrong, and discrimination in all of its forms must be rooted out of our society. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that 400 years of racial discrimination, 400 years of the chattel slavery, or what is called chattel slavery, the enslavement of African people, and the attempt to dehumanize them must have said something to us. The attempt to reduce human beings to chattel, to property that could be bought and sold and beaten and cut up and heads taken off, because we had some of that in St. Peter as well. In around 1675, somewhere in that area, after the failed rebellion by Cuffy, those who were found to be part of that rebellion, their heads were cut off by the planters of the day and put on sticks along Orange Street and Sand Street in Speightstown. That attempt to dehumanize Africans and people of African descent should be saying something to us as a people and to Barbados as a country. over 1,000, maybe 1,500 years of religious wars across countries, across continents. Over 1,500 years of that approach to sharing right and wrong, or perceptions of right and wrong, should say something to us as their people, should say something to us as part of their world. The discrimination that has resulted in the atrocities that we've seen meted out, so that in the early 1900s, Aryan supremacy, that belief that one group is better than another, and because the other group is not as good, they can be exterminated. These kinds of things should speak to us as a parliament, should speak to us as a country, should speak to us as a people whose minds have come to grips with the realities of history and who have made decisions that they will not allow the errors of history to be repeated. And so we have a responsibility, Mr. Speaker. In our time, in this time, we have a responsibility not to make the errors of the past. And when I come to this honorable chamber, like I did in my election campaign, when I say that I stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before, including the late Right Honorable Owen S. Arthur. When I say stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before, I refer to the fact that I intend to build on the experiences of those who have gone before me. I speak about my understanding that I will build on their strengths and that I will avoid their errors. That I will examine what has happened before me, what has transpired. And out of that examination, we can move forward because we are not making the mistakes, the errors of the past. Mr. Speaker, given this party's long-standing support for justice, given the role of our founder, the No Right Excellent Sir Grantley Herbert Adams, in first representing Clement Payne, but secondly, after Clement Payne's deportation, taking on the role of what the masses coined as Moses, representing scriptural Moses who led the children of Israel into the promised land. Given the role of our founders, we recognize as a party that we have, as part of our DNA, a commitment to social justice, to justice generally. And so that is why, as a government, in different eras, we have spoken to economic enfranchisement, we've spoken to economic democracy, and in our Covenant of Hope and in our manifesto of more recent times, we have spoken to and specifically coined or used the term social justice, because we recognize that economic democracy has very little meaning if there is not social justice. So money in my pocket, if there are certain places I can't go, renders the money a little bit meaningless. Social justice must go with economic enfranchisement and the democratization of the economic structures of the country. And Mr. Speaker, this idea of social justice is not one that we conjured up. this idea of social justice and the need to move our country toward a place where all of us can feel that that there's justice meted out, that there's an equality. Getting to that point, to include it in the Covenant of Hope and subsequently in the Manifesto, was a result of our speaking with our people. And as we moved around the country, as we engaged with ordinary people, as we rubbed shoulders, as we had conducted people's assemblies where people spoke freely, as we interacted with Barbadians, we recognized that there was a call, a pull, a push, a strong desire to see social justice. And in your profession, Mr. Speaker, you've come across, both in your social work profession and not your legal profession, many people who feel disconnected from what is called sometimes the system, because they do not feel that they are fully embraced by this construct that they see us walking around in suits talking about. They do not always feel that sense of social justice, justice of the person, justice for every person, a justice that speaks to the fact that all of us are human beings in this together. So that after having spoken with our people, after listening to them, we've said in our documents, every Bajan matters. Every Bajan matters. We've also said, Mr. Speaker, that we have a commitment to build a just, stable, and sustainable society. A just, stable, and sustainable society. And Mr. Speaker, I want us to reflect on that statement for just a moment, because I do not intend to be too long. Like I said, we've spoken in this honorable house, this honorable chamber, at length about discrimination before. But I want us to reflect on the progression in that statement. A society will not be sustainable, cannot be sustainable, if it is not stable. Anything that is unstable is likely to, as we were saying in St. Peter, bust loose at some point in time. Sustainability can only happen if there is stability. And then, Mr. Speaker, a country, a society, can only be stable if there is justice. And so our party in government, our structuring of this phrase speaks to a recognition that justice comes first. Justice is the bedrock for stability, the further bedrock for sustainability. Our role in government, Mr. Speaker, at this time in the country's history, is to make sure that the foundation of justice is laid, that the foundation of justice is well laid, so that the constructs of stability and sustainability can sit on that firm foundation. In our manifesto, Mr. Speaker, we also spoke to the idea of people-centered development, in recognition that justice and stability and sustainability will all just be fancy words. All be fancy words. Many of them will be meaningless words if our development is not at its core people-centered. So that people are those who we are looking after. That is the reason why at the level of the social partnership, Mr. Speaker, we've said safe people doing safe work or engaging in safe activities in a safe country, recognizing that people come first. Our first responsibility is to people. I know the honorable member for St. Michael's South Central will want me to say that dogs come a close second. But people come first in our developmental model. People come first in our approach to creating that sustainable society which is built on stability, which is built on justice for people. One of the fundamental components of justice in any country, in any society, is the ability to earn a living and provide for oneself. That is fundamental. A person who cannot acquire food cannot live very long. A person who cannot acquire food cannot live for very long. And so, Mr. Speaker, the ability to acquire that food becomes important. And as I speak to that, I remember again, and you will, I know, forgive me in the circumstances, remember my predecessor who spoke in 1994 to the creation of 30,000 jobs, who spoke to the idea of creating or getting as close as possible to what economists would call full employment, maybe 2 or 3% unemployment, in some cases 4%, considered full employment because of transitions and that kind of thing. But that is in the DNA of this party. The understanding that for people to survive, then they must have employment. They must be able to earn a living so that they can buy food to feed themselves and to keep themselves alive. It is as basic as that. Anytime we would want to negatively impact a person's ability to earn a living so that the person can eat, so that the person can live, then we have become worse than animals. Anytime we get to the point where we want to negatively impact that, we have gotten to the point where we are acting worse than animals. And so I say, Mr. Speaker, that no human being can be part of that kind of thinking. No human being can be party to that kind of thinking. No person in the judiciary could be party to that kind of thinking. No person like me of faith can be a part of that kind of thinking. And, Mr. Speaker, no government can be part of that kind of thinking. The kind of thinking that would seek to disadvantage a person, to hinder their ability to earn a living and to feed themselves. No person, we talk about civilized, I'm not sure what that means sometimes, but no human being can be party to any kind of action that would disadvantage a person such as to strike to the root of their survival. The bill, Mr. Speaker, that is before this honorable chamber a bill to protect persons from discrimination relating to employment has some history. We have now come to this point, but I need to point out that many years ago, back I think in as early as 2004, there was a recognition that persons living with HIV and AIDS were being discriminated against. There was a recognition back in 2004 that that discrimination was doing exactly what I said that human beings really cannot be party to. That discrimination was impacting the ability of human beings to earn a living. And so it was impacting the ability of those human beings who were living with HIV and AIDS from being able to eat on a daily basis. The government at the time agreed that a register would be established and that it would go, let's use a term, it will go hard against situations where persons living with HIV and AIDS were being discriminated against. As discussion around this topic continued, it was also recognized that people living with disabilities were also being discriminated against. In other words, their ability to earn was being negatively impacted, and it was impacting their ability to eat, and therefore impacting their ability to stay alive, except at the mercy of somebody else. And so it struck directly to the humanity of people, because people were being put into a position where they could only eat if they had access to charitable giving, if they could get to a food bank, if they could get to the Salvation Army. All good causes. But, Mr. Speaker, that is not the country that I would want to live in, where people have to be at the mercy of others when they are still, as it relates to their bodily ability and their mental capacity, still able to contribute, still able to earn a living, still able to sustain themselves using their own strength and their own means. And so the conversation and the discussions broadened to include not just persons living with HIV and AIDS, but also persons living with disabilities. And as the conversation went on over time, it was recognized in those consultations that the whole matter of discrimination needed to be spoken to in its entirety. And so between the Attorney General's chambers and all the stakeholders, it was agreed in recognition that the ability to earn so that a person could eat was such a fundamental right. It was determined that the legislation to address discrimination should be located in the ministry with responsibility for labor. And much work was done over a number of years. There have been many meetings with the social partners over those years in terms of small groups, not the large official body, but small groups of the partners, so that trade unions and employers' organizations have been able to contribute to the development of this piece of legislation. Well, this bill, what is now a bill, proposed piece of legislation. Many comments, much vigorous discussion ensued over the years, and progress was made, albeit slowly, in getting us to the point where we could have a policy directive, and after policy directive, have a bill prepared. In more recent times, further to this government having established a social justice committee, the draft legislation was also discussed quite extensively at the level of the Social Justice Committee. And that conversation represented for us a final full discussion, because the Social Justice Committee is made up of workers' organizations, employers' organizations, faith-based organizations, and many other organizations in the third sector or civil society. So that in the consultation we had with the Social Justice Committee, we would have had discussion in that forum with public sector, with trade unions, with employers' organizations, with those who were government representatives, and with the broad civil society sphere. Those discussions resulted in us making the final tweaks to this piece of legislation, and I want to commend the hard work of the ministry over the years. I want particularly, though, to commend the hard work in more recent times, in the last 2 years in particular, the administrative officer who did quite a bit of work on this project, the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Labor and Social Partnership Relations, the Chief Labor Officer, and my very energetic Permanent Secretary. They have done yeoman work in working with this, pushing it, ensuring that we could do for the people what we would want done for ourselves. That there would be in place in this country of ours, in a 21st century Barbados, a piece of legislation that would prevent me from being discriminated against, that would prevent you from being discriminated against, that would prevent the people in St. Peter and St. Michael's Central and all across Barbados from being discriminated against in the area of employment. The employment that produces the income that is used for all of us to sustain ourselves. Mr. Speaker, the bill that is before us has a number of parts and a number of clauses and 2 schedules appended at the back of the bill. Part 1 of the bill, which, when passed, will be cited as the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act 2020, begins, as always, in all pieces of legislation at Section 2 with definitions called interpretation. It interprets business. It interprets or defines complainant, contract of employment, which has the same meaning as the Employment Rights Act. There is a synergy between this piece of legislation and the Employment Rights Act. Disability is defined in the bill. Discriminate and discrimination is, we will get to that in Section 3. Domestic partnership is defined. the relationship between two persons at least 18 years of age who live together on a domestic basis, but they're not necessarily married, and one is not living with the other in terms of giving care for reward, paid work. There is domestic partnership status that is also defined: employee, employer, employment agency, family member, family responsibility, marital status, all defined in the Act. Medical condition, minor, refers to the definition in the Minors Act. Physical feature, and height, weight, shape, size, distinguishing mark, peculiarity, includes things like hairstyle, hair color, anything physical on a person. Respondent, tribunal. And like I said, Mr. Speaker, the Act has a synergy with the Employment Rights Act, and that is also spoken to in that section. Part 2 speaks to the fundamental issue, and that is discrimination. The bill before this honorable chamber, Mr. Speaker, says that a person discriminates against another person. So we understand that we are talking here about human beings. A person discriminates against another person, where the person, directly or indirectly, whether intentionally or not, makes a distinction, creates an exclusion, or shows a preference, the intent or effect of which is to subject the other person to a disadvantage or to a restriction or to some other detriment. So that is how one way in which discrimination takes place. One person, directly or indirectly, makes this distinction, whatever the distinction is, that causes a showing of preference, and that preference is intended or has the result of subjecting the other person to a disadvantage, to a detriment, or to some kind of restriction. In other words, treating that person differently from if that difference, that distinction, was not there. And then discrimination also occurs when, as a consequence, persons with, there are a number of conditions in Part B, but it speaks to the grounds now for discrimination. Those grounds I'm going to get to, and I'm going to go through them one by one, pretty briefly, but I think I need to mention them for not just this honorable chamber, but this is a piece of legislation for the people of Barbados, the people who have risen up against discrimination, who have said to us they do not accept that in the 2020 Barbados there should be discrimination, and for sure not at the point where it affects their ability to live. The grounds for discrimination in this bill are listed at subsection or subclause 2 of clause 3. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I have thought about this bill for the just over 2 years that I've been minister responsible for the portfolio of labor. And I've looked at this list on a number of occasions. And I have asked myself the question, for each of these in the list, I've asked myself the question, is it right for me to discriminate against another person because of? That is a question that I've asked myself. Is it right for me to discriminate against another person because of race? Is it right for me to discriminate against another person because of their origin? Is it right, Mr. Speaker, for me to discriminate against another person because of their political opinion? I will not discriminate against the honorable member for St. Michael West. I will not. I will not. I don't think it is right. So I will not. And he has my word on that. Is it right, Mr. Speaker, for me or for the country to discriminate against a person because they are affiliated to a trade union? Now, this is a matter, and I don't want to stray from the essence of the bill. But I need to say again to the country, I need to say again to some employers, and I qualify by using the word some, because I'm not referring to all employers. But I have to say to some employers that we are not going to tolerate you getting rid of people at work because you find out that they've become members of a trade union. We are not going to tolerate it. As a matter of fact, we are continuing some work in our ministry in conjunction with the trade union movement to make sure that we strengthen our trade union laws in this country. Because, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, all of us are human beings, and we are not to be discriminated against because I don't agree with you or because I don't like the organization that you want to join. Those days are long past. They never should have existed, but those days are long past. Should I discriminate, Mr. Speaker, against a person because of their color? Should I discriminate against a person because of their creed? No. That one is one that I would get on real bad about. Because creed speaks to my religious beliefs. And anybody who knows me knows that I don't often get angry. But I have taken a little bit of license. And the honorable member for St. Michael West can tell me if I've gone down the wrong road. But when the folk were misusing the temple, Jesus was a very cool, calm individual. But the scriptural record that I believe tells me that he made a whip and that he tumbled over all kinds of tables in that place. He got real agitated, upset. Some people of faith don't like to use the word angry, but I don't know what would cause me to turn over tables in here. I'm not even going to ask the question. I am saying definitively, I will never accept discrimination because of the creed that I hold to. I will never accept discrimination in employment as a result of my religious beliefs. You know what that translates to, Mr. Speaker? I know the reason why I am totally opposed to discrimination in employment for any grounds. There have been Seventh-day Adventists who have been denied employment opportunities because they will not work on Sabbath. I've grown up understanding that. As an adult representing the people of St. Peter in this honorable chamber, I will never be party to discrimination of anybody I can't do it because I believe in the golden rule. I treat the people as I want them to treat to me. I don't want to be discriminated against. The Honorable Member of St. Michael Northeast, the Honorable Prime Minister, often says when we speak about some of these things that, and I am very happy about it, the Honorable Member for St. Michael West knows about it as well. I have been allowed, while a member of a party where I am a minority, I have been allowed to freely practice my religion. I have not been discriminated against because of my creed. Mr. Speaker, I will press on. Some of my colleagues want to give trouble to people who are close to me. I will not accept it. But Mr. Speaker, is it right for me to discriminate against a person because of their sex? Should I discriminate because, well, I'm a man? Should I discriminate against the member for St. Michael's South Central? I don't think I would. I don't think it would be successful. But would it be right even to attempt it?